Week 6 of the fantasy football season. Here's wide receiver start sits every matchup. This week, first matchup Thursday night. Division matchup, NFC West. San Francisco 49ers at the Seattle Seahawks. Deebo Samuel, he's a start for me. I know the last couple weeks since he returned from injury sooner than expected, he hasn't done much with Deebo Samuel. And last week, 3 carries, 9 yards, a catch, 11 yards in that tough loss versus the Arizona Cardinals. But this week, I think this Niner team, they got to get back to basics. They got to get Deebo the ball early and often. And Seattle, we've seen over the last couple weeks, they get shredded in the secondary. The Giants had a big game versus them, and we saw in week 4, Detroit put up 42 points. He's a start. Brandon Ayuk a start as well. He finally had the breakout performance, 8 catches, 147 yards in last week's game, and it just took him a little bit to get his legs under him and into shape after he held out all the training camp as Ayuk. So it was a good sign to see him have a big game, even though I did say sell him high after that big performance. But this week, I still will put him in the lineup. DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith-Njigba starts. DK Metcalf, he's a start each and every week. I know last week a down game, 4 catches, 55 yards on a fumble loss. And it was just a weird game and a tough loss versus the New York Giants. Hey, I think gets back on track. 3 games already this season, 100-plus yards. And I think he bounces back in this one. Jackson Smith-Njigba, he's pretty much in that every week lineup start. I know last week he didn't do much until the end where they got a late touchdown with Smith-Njigba, but like I said, he's finally in the end zone. He's the number 2 target in this offense in the passing game, where Tyler Lockett's been phased out a little bit, and Smith-Njigba with his athleticism and playmaking ability is start. Lockett is sit. I know last week he had a decent game, 4 catches, 75 yards, but the targets haven't been there, and he's the 3rd or 4th option in this offense for Seattle, so it's tough to feed all these wide receivers for Geno Smith. So we'll sit this week. Jacksonville Jaguars at the Bears. Brian Thomas Jr. quickly moving up the ranking board in his rookie season, and a big ball game last week, including an 85-yard touchdown. Running the whole route trees, Brian Thomas. He's a true number 1 already, and this has been some rookie class at the wide receiver position. So this week versus a leaky secondary of the Bears, I think Thomas goes out there once again. It's a good game. Christian Kirk, a flex option. 3 weeks in a row now with double-digit fantasy points. He got off to a slow start. I thought Gabe Davis would be more of a factor since he's playing a decent amount of snaps, but obviously that hasn't been the case. And Christian Kirk and Lawrence, they've had the rapport the last couple seasons. The first 2 weeks, Kirk didn't do much, but once again, last week, another decent performance as a flex option. I have Kirk this week. DJ Moore, a start. DJ Moore really starting to get things going now. 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games with Caleb Williams at the quarterback position. And we know DJ Moore is a great wide receiver. Last season, a monster year. And now coming off of 5 catches, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns in last week's blowout victory versus the Carolina Panthers. I think DJ Moore once again goes out there versus a pretty bad secondary of the Jaguars and has a great game. Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen. Haven't seen enough from both these players, especially Keenan Allen. I don't think he's 100%, and his snaps are going down as well, Keenan Allen. He's just not fitting in this offense with Chicago, and I know he had a great season last year, but injuries and just not a fit, and he's on the decline as well, 32 years old. These wide receivers start to go downhill a little bit, so Keenan Allen is sit. Rome Odunze is sit for me as well. He had the one big game going weeks back at the Indianapolis Colts, but ever since then, mediocre to poor numbers for Odunze. And this offense pretty much is DJ Moore, DeAndre Swift, Roschon Johnson, and Kmet right now with the most production in the last few weeks. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the New Orleans Saints. Mike Evans, he's a start each and every week. Last week found the end zone twice. This offense, high power. Baker Mayfield getting the football down the field, one of the better quarterbacks in the league so far. Chris Godwin, I know it was an off game last week, but he's one of the better route runners, one of the better slot receivers. And this week, this could be a shootout indoors in New Orleans, where we know these two teams, it's always a heated battle. And I know Mike Evans, he's had trouble with Marshawn Lattimore throughout his NFL career, but Evans is too good of a receiver, even in a matchup that's daunted him for the most part throughout his career, to sit him. Now to the Saints, Chris Olave, one of the better receivers in the league. I know he got off to a slow start the first couple weeks, and last week's game wasn't great versus a tough Chief defense. But this week versus a bad secondary of Tampa Bay that we just saw got torched by Drake London and Darnell Mooney, both those guys going over 100 yards, and Kirk Cousins thrown for 509 yards and 4 touchdowns. I think these guys could go out there and have a good ball game. Rashid Shaheed to start. deep ball threat, starting to get involved in different ways. His jet sweeps, gadget guy as well. And like I said, this is a potential shootout between these rivals. Cardinals at the Packers, Marvin Harrison last week a down game, 2 catches, 36 yards. And those are going to be the type of games that Marvin Harrison has. But he's too talented of a wide receiver to be held down multiple weeks in a row. And we've seen some good games and some poor games. So after a dud last week, I think he bounces back even versus a good secondary. And as a start, Michael Wilson, he's been decent as a number 2 option, but not enough to garner any fantasy value week in and week out. So he's a sit in this one. Jaden Reed, he's the only wide receiver you could trust, in my opinion, week in and week out for this Green Bay Packer team. Reed, once again, another solid ball game. He's an explosive playmaker, yard after catch. Better receivers in the league, in my opinion, yard after catch wise. And this week, Arizona, we know their secondary isn't great. Ayuk just went for 147 yards on them, and Jaden Reed, I think, goes out there once again as a good game. Dontayvion Wicks, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson all sits. Wicks, 2 weeks ago, a big ball game, no doubt about it, but that was a lot of script-wise where they had to throw the football a whole lot, where they were trailing 28-0 in week 4 versus the Vikings, where Wicks had 78 yards, 2 touchdowns, but last week only 2 catches, 20 yards versus the Rams. So I can't trust him week in and week out. Romeo Doubs was suspended, and he'll return in this game as Romeo Doubs, but all these receivers are tough to trust. Like I said, besides Jaden Reed and Christian Watson, he was out with a high ankle sprain, and I think he's going to be out once again this week, so he's an obvious sit. Indianapolis Colts at the Titans, Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, I'd put in the starting lineup. The only thing is we'll see if Joe Flacco's the starting quarterback or not, and I mentioned this last week, with Flacco in there quarterback, obviously these receivers are going to have better ball games. We're in a Richardson offense. It's a lot of running by Richardson and a lot of running the football as well, where Richardson, they didn't want him dropping back 40, 45 times a game. With Joe Flacco, obviously a veteran in this league, a Super Bowl under his belt, and a gunslinger, where the Colts don't have a problem, where he could throw them back into ball games. And that's what he did last week at the Jaguars. And Pittman had a good game, and Downs found the end zone twice as well. Alec Pierce is sit. Alec Pierce, I know, had 3 catches, 134 yards, and a touchdown. And he's an all-or-nothing boom or bust deep ball threat as the number 3 wide receiver on this Indianapolis Colts team. But we got to see more consistency the next few weeks here for Pierce to be in the starting lineup. But someone definitely in 12-team leagues or deeper, I believe, should be rostered. Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins are sits. I know this Colt defense isn't any good, but these guys aren't all that great as well this season. Will Levis just can't get on the football. Titans have one of the worst offensive lines in the league, and they're tough to start these receivers. Like I said, one good week, one bad week, or one good week, 2 bad weeks. You just don't want to play the guessing game, even with all the bye weeks. You got to see more consistency to start them weekly. Cleveland Browns at the Philadelphia Eagles, Amari Cooper, a flex option. Amari Cooper, I still think, is a talented wide receiver, but him and Deshaun Watson, they just can't hit and make plays in this offense. Cooper did have 10 targets last week in the blowout loss at the Commanders. 4 catches, only 60 yards. Didn't do much with it. A couple weeks ago as well, we saw Cooper, 70-yard touchdown called back on a holding, and there's a possibility he gets traded towards the trade deadline, where a lot of teams are in need of a wide receiver, and his cap hit isn't a big one as well. But this week, he's a flex option. I know Philadelphia, their defense has gone torched this season, but I think Philadelphia, they're in a good spot now, coming off a bye week, getting healthier, and I think Amari Cooper, I'm not expecting a high ceiling. Jerry Jeudy is sit. I know Judy's been decent so far this season, but his ceiling isn't high. This whole offense as a whole, not much going on right now for this Cleveland Brown team. And Philadelphia, like I said, they're well-rested coming off a bye week. They're making adjustments, and their secondary has a lot of talent on paper. It just hasn't shown on the field. But this week, I think they make it a tough ball game for Cleveland, and both these receivers aren't great options. Philadelphia, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, I'm assuming, are going to return. Smith had the concussion, so he missed Week 4's game, then the bye in Week 5, so gave him 2 weeks to heal. He should be back. He's an explosive receiver. And A.J. Brown, he's been out since early in the season. So now to get these 2 weapons back in the offense for Philadelphia is definitely a boost, where the Cowboys are 3-2 on the season, Commanders 4-1, and this Philly team 2-2, where they know they got to go out there and take care of business. So with these 2 big weapons back in the lineup, most likely, these are must-start guys. I know Denzel Ward, one of the better corners in the league, but to me, it just hasn't done much, where we've seen receivers still have good games. Texans at the Patriots, Nico Collins, he left that game early with the hamstring injury in the second quarter, and he was going to have a monster ball game versus the Buffalo Bills, where he started off 2 catches, 78 yards, and a touchdown on a 67-yard touchdown. So Nico Collins, I think he's possibly the best receiver in fantasy football right now. But like I said, if this hamstring injury nags, he could be out. So if he's playing, obviously he's a must-start, top 3-5 option, worst case. Stephon Diggs, a start for me. Last week, I thought he was going to have a bigger ball game. It's the Buffalo Bills, his former team, but not much going on. But Diggs, great route runner. Him and Stroud have a good rapport. They're going out there making plays. And this week in a good matchup at New England, I think Diggs goes out there and has a better game than he did last week. Tank Dell back in the lineup last week, only 4 catches, 38 yards for this Houston Texan team. And if Nico Collins is out, I still think Tank Dell is a flex option and is number 2 wide receiver once Collins went out in that game versus the Buffalo Bills. But we have to see a little bit more out of Tank Dell before he's a slam dunk option. So to me, he's a flex option, 3rd receiver in 3 receiver leagues or a flex. But like I said, if Collins is out in this game, then you bump up Tank Dell, Demario Douglas, Jalen Polk. Just not much going on in this Patriot passing game. It's all about running the football and playing good defense, and their running backs catching the football out of the backfield. So both these receivers haven't shown much, unfortunately. That's it. Commanders at the Baltimore Ravens. Besides Terry McLaurin, not much has gone down. I know Dami Brown had a touchdown last week. We've seen flashes from Luke McCaffrey, Noah Brown, but Terry McLaurin, the only receiver with fantasy value. And the last few weeks, him and Jaden Daniels have kicked it into gear, and he scored touchdowns now 3 weeks in a row is scary, Terry. So this week in a matchup at the Baltimore Ravens, where we've seen their secondary get torched. Last week, 10 catches, 193 yards, 2 TDs for Jamar Chase. And we saw T. Higgins find the end zone twice as well. And I think Terry McLaurin, once again, is a start. Zay Flowers is starting me for this one. I know the numbers haven't been all that great for Zay Flowers. He's another wide receiver. He's like a mini Devonta Smith. Some games he'll pop off for ball games, 20, 25 fantasy points. And then other weeks, he won't do much, is Zay Flowers. But last week, he went out there in a big victory at the Cincinnati Bengals, and he had 7 catches, 111 yards, and he's the number 1 target in this passing game. So week in and week out, Zay Flowers is a start for me. Rashad Bateman, I know, found the end zone, but that was just a highway shootout between 2 division rivals, and we have to see more out of Bateman for him to be a fantasy option, but definitely someone that could be on the radar in the next few weeks, but he's a sit. Chargers at the Broncos, both these receiving cores just inconsistent, haven't done much this season. Quentin Johnson, Lab McConkey, the top 2 wide receivers for this Los Angeles Charger team, but a very tough matchup at the Denver Broncos. We know Patrick Surtain, he's a lockdown corner. We saw Surtain, 101-yard touchdown last week on a pick 6, and it's going to be a tough day for Quentin Johnson with him on him. And Lab McConkey, I think he's a decent slot receiver, but this Bronco defense, one of the top units in all pro football, and he's hard to trust. And Joshua Palmer, we'll see if he returns from injury in this one. He's a sit. Cortland Sutton a sit. Josh Reynolds a sit. Sutton last week, a pedestrian game. He didn't do much in that one. Reynolds did find the end zone, but that was versus the Vegas Raiders. And I think this could be a grinded-out matchup between these 2 AFC West teams where it's low scoring and a lot of field goals. We see in this one, Pittsburgh Steelers at the Vegas Raiders, George Pickens a start. I know Pickens last week, the numbers weren't all that great. And Justin Fields versus a banged-up Dallas Cowboy defense, it wasn't a great game for Justin Fields. And Pickens, only 3 catches, 26 yards on 7 targets. But Pickens, he's that type of wide receiver where he's been boom or bust as well. He's a guy capable of going for $150 and a touchdown. And then like a performance last week with only 3 catches, 26 yards. But this week in a great matchup at a bad Vegas Raider team that just gave up 34 points to the Denver Broncos, I have confidence Pickens bounces back. He's a start. Plus, it was bad weather conditions as well with rain, wet field in that one versus the Cowboys. To the Vegas Raiders, Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker sits for me. This Steelers defense, pretty solid unit. Last week, they did a good job, I thought. Pittsburgh was Fitzpatrick for the most part on CeeDee Lamb. 5 catches, 62 yards. I know Jalen Tolbert did the damage. 7 catches, 87 yards, and a touchdown in that game. But this is a good secondary. The Steelers defense, indoor game, they don't got to deal with the rain elements. And Jacoby, last week, Myers had a decent game, 6 catches, 72 yards. A lot of garbage time, once again, it was for Jacoby Myers, where this week I think this game could be a grinded-out, tight contested matchup. So Myers, he's a sit for me. We have to see a little bit more out of him. And like I said, Davante Adams, time of recording this, still hasn't got traded, but he's not going to play again in a Raider uniform until a trade comes to fruition, and I believe it could happen this week. But Myers, to me, is a sit. Trey Tucker, a sit for me as well in this ball game. Trey Tucker, Week 4 and Week 5 had big ball games. And then last week, laid an egg, 2 catches, 18 yards on 5 targets. It's a tough matchup once again, I believe, versus Steelers defense. And they're both sits. Falcons at the Carolina Panthers. Drake London finally had that breakout performance last week, going 150 yards and a touchdown for this Atlanta Falcon team. And that's the breakout game they needed on Thursday Night Football, where it was a nuclear performance by that whole offense. So London, 12 catches, 154 yards, found the end zone. And Darnell Mooney, 9 catches, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So it's tough to sit both those plays, especially Darnell Mooney. It was one of the best games of his NFL career. But him and Kirk Cousins, I've mentioned for weeks, they're starting to have a good rapport. Mooney, he's a good yard after catch and deep ball threat. And this week in a great matchup with the Panthers that can't stop anyone. Both these receivers are starts to me. Deontay Johnson a start. He had 2 monster ball games, 120 yards. In Week 3 was Deontay Johnson, the victory at Las Vegas. And then Week 4 he came back with over 70 yards and found the end zone in that loss versus the Bengals. And then last week, he didn't do much, is Deontay Johnson. With that Chicago Bear defense, one of the better units in the league, holding him down to 3 catches, 23 yards. But this week, I think he bounces back. We saw last week big performances all the way around in that ball game with Tampa Bay. Mike Evans had a big game. And I think Deontay Johnson versus this defense could go out there and be a start option. Xavier Legette banged up the shoulder, left the ball game, only ended it with 1 catch for 8 yards. But he said he's good to go and he's going to play. But I have to see more out of Xavier Legette. But definitely a receiver to be owned in all 12, 14-team leagues. Detroit Lions at the Dallas Cowboys. This could be a mini shootout between these two teams. Lions, we saw a monster performance from them in Week 4 before they went on bye in that one versus Seattle Seahawks. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's locked in as a top 5 option each and every week. And this Cowboys secondary banged up, even though they did a great job at the Steelers, but he's a must-start. Jamison Williams, he's like a mini Devonta Smith as well, boom or bust, where he's got obviously the upside to go for 150 yards and a touchdown, or weeks will get 1 catch for 10 yards. But this week, like I said, indoor game, shootout, I believe, between these two teams. And Jamison Williams, he's an explosive wide receiver and a start. CeeDee Lamb, he's a start each and every week. I know he's not putting up the elite numbers where he got drafted 2nd, 3rd overall in most fantasy leagues. But I think this week it's a good matchup for him where both teams are going to go up and down the field. And CeeDee Lamb, we know it just takes him some time to get things going. And with holding out all the training camp, we've seen it with guys like Ayuk. We've seen it with Jamar Chase. It takes some time for them to get going. But CeeDee Lamb, I think this is the breakout game this week. Jalen Tolbert definitely on the radar with Brandon Cooks out at least a minimum 3 more weeks. Tolbert had a starting role, and he went out there including a game-winning touchdown with 20 seconds left last week at the Steelers. 7 catches, 87 yards, and a touchdown. So I think he's a flex option. Sunday night, Cincinnati Bengals at the Giants. Jamar Chase went nuclear last week. 10 catches, 193 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's back, and he wants that monster contract, and rightfully so. He's a start versus Giants secondary that can't stop anyone. T. Higgins, he looks healthy, and he's on a 1-year franchise tag deal as well where he wants a monster deal. So last week, 2 touchdowns for Higgins, and this week, I think the Spangle team goes into New York and puts up a big performance. They're both must starts. Malik Neighbors, I believe, returns from the concussion, and he was one of the best wide receivers in the league before going down in Week 4 versus the Dallas Cowboys. So this week he comes back in the lineup, and this secondary we saw can't stop anyone. A Cincinnati, so he's a must-start. Wan'Dale Robinson, he's a starter for me as well. He fits this Giant offense perfectly as an underneath route runner and a yard after catch player and a PPR type of player. So Wan'Dale found the end zone last week, and this week versus Cincinnati Bengal team that we saw last week can't stop anyone. He's a start. And then Monday night, division matchup, Buffalo Bills at the New York Jets, AFC East matchup. Khalil Shakir missed last week's game with the ankle injury, but I'm thinking he's going to return in this ball game, gets the extra week and the extra day on top of it, and he's a start. He's the number 1 target in this offense, and we saw they missed him a lot in that ball game where it was tough for Josh Allen moving the football up and down the field. And we'll see if Allen's going to play, if he could get out of the concussion protocol this week here for this Buffalo Bill team. Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel is here. Keon Coleman, he's got that specialty of catching one ball and finding the end zone. This is the 2nd time this season we've seen it from Coleman. Early in the year, on Monday night, we saw in the blowout victory versus the Jaguars in Week 3. He had 1 catch, 24 yards, a touchdown. And then last week, in the tightrope down the sideline, 1 catch, 49 yards, and a touchdown in a tough loss to Houston. But like I said, the volume isn't there. The targets aren't there. And that was without Shakir. That he didn't do much was Coleman season. Say Curtis Samuel as well. He hasn't done much. And I think this Buffalo Bill team, they got to go out there and make a deal with the deadline for like an Amari Cooper if he's on the trade block, Devontae Adams, even though I think he's going to the Jets or the Saints. But anyway, Curtis Samuel will sit to the Jets. Garrett Wilson, what a target ball game it was for Garrett Wilson. His target share was huge in that tough loss in London versus the Minnesota Vikings. But him and Rodgers were starting to get on the same page. 22 targets, which is out of control, with 13 catches, 101 yards, and found the end zone. And that was the big game for Garrett Wilson. And this week, I know it's a tougher matchup versus a good defense, even though Minnesota is a great defense as well. But I think Wilson goes out there, and he's starting to get things going. And this is a must-win ball game for the Jets. I know it's early in the year. I know this division is tight. The Bills are 3-2 on the season, and the Jets, they're 2-3 with a win. Both these teams are tied up, but they need to get Garrett Wilson the ball. And I think he produces another nice game. Allen Lazard, a flex option. And Allen Lazard, 2 out of 3 weeks, he's found the end zone. He's Rodgers' go-to guy, it seems like, in the red zone. And last week dropped another one where he almost had 2 touchdowns. Allen Lazard, I think he's a decent flex option. Like I said, the targets are going to be there. Rodgers trusts him. Mike Williams, he's really not up to snuff in this offense. And obviously, time of recording this, Devontae Adams, he hasn't been traded anywhere as well. So that's wide receiver starts hit every matchup. Week 6 of the fantasy football season.